Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. This Saturday is UFC 290, Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez for the undisputed UFC featherweight title. And this is going to be my full breakdown and prediction. And this card is absolutely stacked. This main event is massive in the featherweight division, and it's an amazing main event overall. I've already done a full card prediction video. If you're interested in that, I will link it down in the description, as well as my full UFC 290 playlist if you want to go check out any of those videos. But this main event, honestly, is being massively overlooked. This is a huge fight, and for me, Volkanovski versus Rodriguez is more compelling than the original rumored main event of this card back in March, which was John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. I like Volkanovski versus Rodriguez better. This is an amazing fight, and for the first time in many years, the perceived level of threat to Volkanovski is there. At least for me personally, going into this fight, I feel like Alexander Volkanovski can lose this matchup. This could be the end of Volkanovski's title reign because Yair Rodriguez is so young. He's so fast. He's so dynamic. The kicks are so powerful. He has unbelievable jiu-jitsu. He's so ferocious. And I just feel like this fight, when you compare it to all other Alexander Volkanovski title defenses, I feel like the perceived level of threat is there, that Rodriguez could truly win this fight. Where I look back to the Max Holloway trilogy or the Brian Ortega fight or the Korean Zombie fight, I didn't feel that going into those fights. I was very confident that Alexander Volkanovski would get the job done. In this fight, I truly believe Rodriguez can win this matchup. That's what makes this fight so compelling. And styles make fights. Volkanovski's coming back down from lightweight. He just finished challenging Islam Makhachev, who's heavily a grappler, who's primarily a grappler, and Yair Rodriguez is a totally different stylistic matchup. But Volkanovski is just so smart. His fight IQ is unbelievable. He's so well-rounded. His stamina is unbelievable. He's almost impossible to submit. So that's what makes this fight so compelling, because Volkanovski's been dominant for so long. He's never lost at featherweight, and now he's taken this surging contender in Yair Rodriguez, who's super flashy and has unbelievable power in his kicks. And I'm curious how Alexander Volkanovski approaches this fight, because he's just so smart in the way he fights and the way he addresses his opponent's strengths and the way he makes adjustments mid-fight. And that's what makes this fight so compelling. Both guys are super high level. Stylistically, it should be a fan-friendly matchup. And also, it's always that possibility that you see a dominant champion have their title run ended. And that's what makes, for me personally, makes me so excited for this matchup. I haven't felt that in years for an Alexander Volkanovski fight. I've been excited for his fights, but I'm like, okay, he's probably going to put on a masterclass here. But for this matchup, I'm genuinely curious how he deals with that heavy kicking style of Yair Rodriguez and that scrappy style of Yair Rodriguez. I'm so interested in this matchup, and I'm so curious how it inevitably plays out. Now, if you look at the tail of the tape, Alexander Volkanovski 25-2, Yair Rodriguez 15-3. Volkanovski, the undisputed champion. Yair Rodriguez, the interim champion. Volkanovski 34, Rodriguez 30. Volkanovski 5'6", Rodriguez 5'11". Volkanovski with a 71.5-inch reach, and Rodriguez with a 71-inch reach. So a half-inch reach advantage for Volkanovski, which is honestly surprising, and a 5-inch height advantage for Yair Rodriguez. So if you look at Yair Rodriguez, of his pro 15 MMA wins, 5 by knockout, 4 by submission, and 6 by decision. Of his 3 losses, 2 by knockout, 1 by decision. He's coming in this fight only on a 2-fight winning streak. He fought Josh Emmett at UFC 284. He was the co-main event of the same fight card where Volkanovski attempted to become 2-division champion against Islam Makhachev. We'll talk about that fight in a little bit when we're talking about Volkanovski. But they made an interim belt because Volkanovski went up the challenge to become a 2-weight champion. And he fought Josh Emmett at UFC 284. And he absolutely butchered Josh Emmett. Lit him up with leg kicks, lit him up with body kicks, landed some flying knees, landed some crazy punches. And Yair just looked like an absolute world beater in this fight. And I know Josh Emmett rocked him with a big overhand right, and Yair ended up on his back for a little bit in the first round. But Yair was just slamming hammer fists from the bottom, slamming elbows from the bottom, refusing to accept the position. And then in the second round, he came out with absolutely no fear of the takedown, just started lighting him up with kicks again. He lands a flying knee. Josh Emmett takes him down, and then Yair Rodriguez, pretty soon after that, gets a triangle choke and submits Josh Emmett. The fight before that, he beats Brian Ortega. This is back in July of last year. I know people kind of discredit this win of Yair Rodriguez because Brian Ortega took Yair down. Yair was kind of scrambling for an armbar. Brian Ortega was pulling his arm out of the armbar and dislocated his shoulder. So it was stopped due to essentially a shoulder injury, and a lot of people were calling it a fluke. I think Yair Rodriguez submitted Brian Ortega, in my opinion. He injured him while attempting to go for an armbar. In my opinion, that's a submission because it was so tight that when Ortega pulled his arm out, he dislocated his shoulder. And then on top of that, he also destroyed Brian Ortega on the feet before that. So I still think, all told, it was a good performance by Yair Rodriguez. The fight before that was his return from a long layoff against Max Holloway back in November of 2021. And this was a much more competitive fight than a lot of people thought it would be, myself included. But Max Holloway clearly won. And in the third and fourth round, which we're going to talk about later in the video, Max Holloway was able to out-grapple him. And at one point in the fourth round, he had him full mounted, raining down the ground and pound. And that's a massive hole that people talk about in terms of Yair Rodriguez's overall skill set because Max Holloway was out-wrestling him. Max Holloway was able to land on the feet. It was a super competitive fight, and Yair could go a hard 5 rounds. Yair arguably even won the 5th round. But I do believe, even though Yair winning the 5th round against Max Holloway is super impressive, I do believe that because Max Holloway had such a high output in round 4, that's why Yair Rodriguez was able to win round 5. But nonetheless, even though he lost, I still think it was a good performance, especially considering that was in November of 2021. His last fight was October of 2019 before that. His last fight before that, he beat the brakes off of Jeremy Stephens. The fight before that, he eye-poked Jeremy Stephens, and it was a no contest. The last fight before that was against the Korean Zombie. But we're getting back all the way to 2018. These fights don't necessarily matter. You know, I know a lot of people like to take into account previous fights, but once you get to a certain extent in terms of time in the past, they really don't matter because these fighters are vastly improving from fight to fight. And I believe Yair Rodriguez, not only is he very young, he's still improving fight after fight. So I don't believe the Korean Zombie fight from November 2018 is indicative of his 2023 skill set. But that was one of the most incredible finishes I've ever seen. He was down on the scorecards. The last few seconds of the fight, he lands an upward elbow and KOs the Korean Zombie. If you haven't seen that finish, go check it out. But, you know, you want to look at some of his other losses in the UFC. It's to Frankie Edgar. That's his only other loss outside of Max Holloway. Frankie Edgar took him down, beat the brakes off him, but that's all the way back in 2017. That is 6 long years ago. That's when Yair Rodriguez was 24 years old. So really, it doesn't matter at this point. You look at Alexander Volkanovski. Alexander Volkanovski, of his 25 pro MMA wins, 12 by knockouts, 3 by submission, and 10 by decision. Of his 2 losses, he's lost once by knockout and once by decision. His only loss in recent memory is against Islam Makhachev. The other fight that he lost was all the way back in 2013 in a completely different promotion. I mean, that's 10 long years ago, past 10 years ago, because that was in May of 2013. So the guy has looked unbeatable. And in his last fight, he went up to lightweight to take on Islam Makhachev, one of the pound-for-pound best fighters. And I knew going into this fight, I told everyone who would listen to me, this will be a competitive fight. Alexander Volkanovski is better than people are giving him credit for. People were saying, oh, Islam's going to dominate him. I picked Islam Makhachev to win. I thought Volkanovski would make it very competitive, and Volkanovski did make it very competitive. Now, with that being said, I still scored it for Makhachev. I thought Makhachev clearly won 3-2. I thought you could even make an argument 4-1 for Makhachev, and Volkanovski performed incredible, and I think his stock went up because, you know, Islam was able to get him down, but wasn't able to do a whole lot with it. And then also Volkanovski in that 5th round, that left a big impact on people. The fact that he ended up on top of Makhachev, raining down strikes to end the fight, that left a big impact on people. And I feel like because Volkanovski's performance at UFC 284, this was back in February, because of his performance against Islam Makhachev, Volkanovski almost now appears invincible because if he can't barely lose to Islam Makhachev, because a lot of people thought Volkanovski won that fight, how is anyone at featherweight possibly going to beat him? That's a lot of people's logic. But nonetheless, Makhachev still won. Makhachev, honestly, in my opinion, won with his striking, not really his grappling. People were saying, well, he didn't do anything on the ground. Yeah, well, he was out striking him before he took him down and controlled him. But nonetheless, that was one of the best fights of the year. And Volkanovski looked unbelievably impressive with his takedown defense and his striking. And he just looked so good. His stamina looked unbelievable in that fight as well. The fight before that was UFC 276, the trilogy against Max Holloway. He beat the brakes off of Max Holloway. Absolutely destroyed him. 50-45'd him. Left absolutely no doubt. Beat him up with his hands. Beat him up with some leg kicks. And really, it looked like Max Holloway didn't even belong in there. which is craziness considering how good Max Holloway is. People consider him one of the greatest of all time at 145. And for Volkanovski to go out there and put on that statement performance was absolutely incredible. The fight before that, he beat up the Korean zombie Chan Sung Jung, TKO'd him in the 4th round. I mean, he beat him badly, but honestly, for me, it didn't make any sense. The Korean zombie stepped in on short notice. The fight, you know, the Korean zombie is on the decline. It didn't really make sense at the time, so it doesn't really mean a whole lot. But he did beat him pretty badly. The fight before that, he beat up Brian Ortega. Absolutely destroyed him. I know a lot of people like to act like this was one of the best fights of the year. This was a one-sided beatdown for Alexander Volkanovski with a couple close submission attempts for Brian Ortega. The fight before that was at UFC 251 against Max Holloway. This was the rematch. This was the closest fight of the 3 against Max Holloway. This is a very close fight. I still gave it to Volkanovski. Looked very good in this fight. It was super technical. The fight before that was when he initially beat Max Holloway. I thought he won that fight pretty clearly. I know people were debating that first fight. I thought you could debate the second fight. The first fight at UFC 245 was undebatable for me. I thought Volkanovski clearly won that fight, and he looked incredible. And honestly, Volkanovski, I've been so high on him for so long. I have not picked against him since he beat Jose Aldo. When he beat Jose Aldo at UFC 237 back in 2019, there has not been a single fight that I have picked against Volkanovski. It's crazy the resume that he has. Chad Mendes, Jose Aldo, Max Holloway times 3. I mean, Brian Ortega and Chan Sung Jung don't mean a whole lot, but even a loss against Islam Makhachev, an incredible performance. Volkanovski, it's crazy to me that he had this incredible long win streak all the way from May of 2013 was the last fight that he lost, all the way until Islam Makhachev beat him in February of 2023. The guy looks unbeatable. Unbeatable, even though he lost his last fight. He still looks unbeatable. And it's weird to kind of be in that situation to be that good. But every champion, every dominant champion eventually has a fall. And is Yair Rodriguez the guy to do it? This matchup is so compelling because Alexander Volkanovski is just so well-rounded. His fight IQ is unbelievable. His game planning is unbelievable. But Yair Rodriguez, he goes out there and fights every single fight like it is an absolute death match. He is fighting for his life every time he goes out there. I've talked about this so many times. Yair is one of the few fighters that goes out there and he fights so ferociously that I genuinely feel like he's trying to kill his opponent or hurt them very seriously. That is the way he fights. And he fights that from any position, whether it's the clinch, whether they're striking on the feet, whether he's on his back on the bottom, he fights like that. And that's what makes this fight so dangerous for Alexander Volkanovski, because if he zigs when he should have zags and he eats a massive head kick from Yair Rodriguez, he could get slapped. If he eats a bicycle kick or a spinning wheel kick, or he thinks Yair's coming upstairs and Yair just slams a nasty body kick right to the liver, Yair could finish Alexander Volkanovski. And I really do believe Yair Rodriguez's main path to victory in this fight is KO or TKO. I think if Yair Rodriguez wins this fight, it is most likely by KO or TKO. But I do believe Yair Rodriguez, he's so sneaky and he's so good with his jiu-jitsu, and the jiu-jitsu is ever improving, and he uses some of the strikes off his back to set up some submissions. I do believe Yair Rodriguez could also pull off a submission here. He is super crafty off his back. And as far as a decision for Yair Rodriguez, I think it's possible, but I think it's highly unlikely. For Alexander Volkanovski, I think Alexander Volkanovski, we all know he primarily wins via decision, but his gas tank is so unbelievable. If there's a 6th round against Islam Makhachev, I think Volkanovski finishes Islam Makhachev in the 6th round. So depending on the pace of this fight, Volkanovski, not only can he win via decision, which I think is the most likely scenario for Volkanovski if he wins, I think he could win via late round TKO, KO, maybe via ground and pound. Now, I don't think Volkanovski is going to look for a submission in this fight against Yair Rodriguez. I don't think that's very likely, but if Yair gets gassed out in the later rounds and Volkanovski's beating him up and Yair's still kind of squirming around and the ref's not stopping it, I could see him going for a submission, but I think submission is most unlikely for Volkanovski in terms of victory. But for my official prediction, I am going Alexander Volkanovski via decision. For me, I look back at some of these fights and I see Yair Rodriguez and I see how incredible he's looked. But against Max Holloway, I can't get that grappling in the 3rd and 4th round out of my head. And if Max Holloway is doing that to you, I think Volkanovski has way better grappling than Max Holloway. And I also think Volkanovski clearly has better striking than Max Holloway as well. So I think Volkanovski, putting that all together, I just think he's way too well-rounded. And for me, Yair Rodriguez can definitely win this fight. For the last couple of weeks, I've been leaning Yair Rodriguez. But I think Yair has to get him out of there. I think he has to finish him in that first, second, or third round. And Alexander Volkanovski is so durable, so unbelievably durable. And I just don't think Yair Rodriguez will be able to get him out of there. I just don't think he will unless he finds some super crafty submission. I don't think he's going to be able to go out there and finish Alexander Volkanovski. His chin is too good. So for me, even if Yair is able to win the first round, first 2 rounds, I think Volkanovski, just him being unbelievably well-rounded and mixing in the grappling and landing shots on the feet, I just think that you'll see a Volkanovski win those later rounds, that 3rd, 4th, and 5th round. Meanwhile, Yair will start to get tired because he's throwing all these flashy, crazy techniques. And I just think Volkanovski, he's going to come in with a great game plan. I think he's going to crowd Yair early. He's going to look to avoid those big shots. He's going to look for the takedown. I think he's going to use control time. He's going to beat him up with ground and pound. But then also, you look back to the Volkanovski versus Makhachev fight, and you've seen that Makhachev was super effective on the feet because Makhachev had the threat of the takedown. Volkanovski has that advantage in this fight. And on top of that, I don't even think Volkanovski might not even have to shoot a takedown to get Yair down because Yair throws these crazy, flashy techniques. Sometimes he just slips and ends up on bottom. That happened multiple times against Max Holloway. So I think Volkanovski can catch him in one of those weird moments where maybe Yair's throwing a crazy spinning technique and Volk kicks the leg out from underneath him, ends up on top, controls him, beats him up a bit. And then Yair, as the rounds go on, Yair starts to slow down. Volkanovski starts out-grappling him some more. And maybe even once Rodriguez starts to slow down, I could see Volkanovski just outstriking him in the later rounds. I just think that Volkanovski is way too well-rounded and way too durable. And unless Yair gets that finish, I just have a hard time believing Yair can just leg kick him and body kick him and brutalize him from the bottom if he gets taken down and find his way to a decision victory. I just don't think that's super possible. But you look back at some of the dominant champions, whether it be Kamaru Usman or Anderson Silva, when they tend to lose, they tend to get KO'd. Israel Adesanya, I know that was a TKO. So if I'm making an argument for Yair Rodriguez, the laws of percentages, Alexander Volkanovski has not lost at featherweight ever. So, and especially in the UFC, and I know Volkanovski, he lost that fight to Islam Makhachev, but that's a completely different stylistic matchup, completely different weight class. And Yair Rodriguez might be very well the guy to do it. If Yair catches him with one of those spinning heel kicks he likes to throw in the first round, he can finish Alexander Volkanovski. But I just don't think the probability of that is high enough to pick Yair Rodriguez. I just don't think it is. And I think those later championship rounds are going to be key in this fight. But ultimately, I think this fight is going to be very competitive early, with Volkanovski slowly pulling out ahead of Yair Rodriguez later in the fight. And I think Yair is just going to slow down. And I think Volkanovski is going to be taking him down at will, basically in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, beating him up on the ground. And I could see Yair starting to slow down, where Volkanovski is just landing good shots on the feet, and he's mixing it up with uppercuts and leg kicks himself and hooks, and just landing good shots and body shots as well. And also, I know Yair has looked so incredible in his last few fights, but I hate to say it, I think Josh Emmett's kind of a fraud. I know he's a decent fighter, but I thought Josh Emmett lost to Dan Ige. I thought he lost to Calvin Kattar. I didn't even think he deserved the title shot. Brian Ortega, he looked good against, but Brian Ortega is one of the biggest frauds in the featherweight division. Brian Ortega doesn't have a win outside of the Korean Zombie since like 2017, 2018. That's insane to me. So even though Yair has looked so good, he's been improving, I just don't think the guys that he has beaten are anywhere on the level of Alexander Volkanovski. And therefore, I just can't imagine him going out there and finding that kill shot against Volkanovski. I think Volkanovski gets it done. His cardio is way too good. His game planning is way too good. His fight IQ is way too good. His striking is way too good. And he's just super, diverse in his striking as well. And I know Yair is crazy. He has a crazy variety of attacks with his kicks and his punches, and he hides his punches behind his kicks very well. He'll throw a high kick and throw a punch right behind it. And maybe he catches Volkanovski in one of those offbeat moments. And I think it's possible. But I think even if he does catch him, I think Volkanovski is so gritty out there and so durable, I think he'll survive it. And I think he'll survive it. He'll find a takedown. He'll start to beat him up. He'll look to recover. And then he will go on to win this fight. I think it's going to be a very competitive fight. I think both guys are going to leave with visible damage on their face. But ultimately, I think Alexander Volkanovski gets it done. I'm going to say 49-46 decision for Alexander Volkanovski. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to check out my full card picks, I will link it in the description as well as the end card. cards. Thank you so much for watching.